Hello, and welcome to the Godot community for high school visual art 3D. I'm Heather Meyer. In my experience, students taking sculpture often don't have a great understanding of what sculpture is, since most students have experience with 2D media. Sometimes, when challenged with making something three dimensionally, they may run into a creative wall or even shut down. So, over the course of the next three episodes, I'll be discussing some activities to spark creativity in the 3D classroom. Some of you who have seen previous webinars may have seen activities such as the Richard Serra verb list and the design cube that I like to do with my 3D classes. So this is going to augment that just a bit. In the first episode, I'm going to talk about two activities that I find are good comprehensive exercises. The first, the Marshmallow Challenge, is more of an icebreaker and team building activity, but I feel that it has merit beyond that. The second activity I will be discussing is what I call sculpture in a bag. This exercise allows students more independence and choice. Though I will talk about guidelines for each of these activities, I think both can be altered or changed for your specific circumstances based on time and budget limitations. The first activity I'm going to discuss is something you can find on the internet. It is not of my own making, so you may already be familiar with it. I've talked to teachers who have done this activity with elementary or middle school students, high school teachers who teach math, science, lit, etc. And whereas I feel like it's valuable in all of those scenarios, it's just a great collaborative idea that has a three-dimensional aspect that makes it perfect for a beginning sculpture class. I start by dividing the class into groups of 4 to 5 students, and I give each group 20 sticks of spaghetti, dry, not cooked, 3 feet, although cooked would certainly make for interesting outcomes, 3 feet of masking tape, 3 feet of string. For the string, I've used yarn, I've used thicker thread, so whatever you have, and one large marshmallow. And the challenge is to make the tallest structure possible. The structure has to be freestanding and must balance on its own without being fastened to a surface or leaning against anything. Before starting, I encourage them to examine and touch the materials, move it around in their hands. I suggest they come up with a group plan. Some of them, of course, want to jump right in. Students are instructed that they can use as many or as few of the materials that they want. They can alter the materials in any way. And then that's about it as far as instruction. As the students work, I visit each group. I don't give advice or anything further as far as instruction. I simply observe. It's interesting to see, and and they have questions. They want to ask you, how do I get started? And I do not budge because it's really interesting to see how they all get started. Sometimes, you'll have kids that start with a pyramid. Sometimes you have them creating a box. Sometimes you want to just jump in and say, no, don't do that, but you can't. You got to let them kind of figure it out. And it's really great to hear them discussing possibilities and troubleshooting solutions, and even more so, reworking what isn't successful. There's a lot of manipulation of the materials in a variety of ways. So you have kids cutting or tearing the masking tape down, taking a marshmallow and squishing it around until it's really gooey and sticky and almost liquefied. They all approach the challenge differently, which I think is something we see a lot when we provide students with choice within a bit of structure. And I think it's also something that we just generally see in sculpture classes anyway. And then, of course, when the students are done, I measure their finished work and have them document the outcome. So at the end, I always have a prize in the form of candy, usually, for the students who have managed to reach the tallest height. I'm a sucker, so typically everybody gets candy just for the attempt. But, our winners, of course, get it first. When the challenge is completed, I have students reflect on what they've done. Even though this is a one off and gets done in a 15 or 20 so minute time period, having them reflect accomplishes a few things. First, it begins the habit of having them write about their work. I think even from beginning level courses, this is best practice. It's good literacy component that you can share with your admin. It's a good literacy component to any classroom, but especially for students who will be moving on to advanced level courses. There's a lot of writing in IB and AP. Nowadays, it helps students learn to speak more fluently about their work using subject specific language. It can also be valuable for students who may be nominated for programs or enter competitions that require that they write about their work as part of the application process or as an artist statement. Reflecting also kind of gives value to what's been done. The actual constructed form might not even be graded, but through the process, there's learning going on, and it's valuable to have students identify when learning is occurring. A reflection also gives students an opportunity, of course, to evaluate their performance on several levels, whether it be assessing their success with the materials and craftsmanship, their thoughts on how well they collaborated, which may not have anything to do with the outcome of the challenge, and then thinking about the value of such exercises beyond creating the form. A reflection for this looks like what you see on this slide. Was it for them to get to know their classmates? Yes. Was it for me to see their knowledge and problem solving skills with regard to construction and engineering? Yeah, maybe. I asked them if they planned and the value of collaborating when building something. I asked them to identify what was most challenging. Sometimes this may do with the materials, and sometimes it has to do with working with others. I think, especially as art teachers, we tend to have students who are solo, they are loners, and sometimes it's really difficult for them to come out of their shell. But I think it's important because, let's face it, in the real world, you rarely are flying alone. Um, I asked them to reflect on the possibilities and limitations of the material and if having prior knowledge of the materials was helpful in the success of the outcome. And lastly, I asked them if they were successful. And this is a bit of a trick question since I want them to understand that even though the objective was to build a form as tall as possible, there were other areas in which they could achieve success. Collaborating and communication, experimenting with something unconventional, and in some cases, persevering when work did not turn out as intended. And all of these are valuable takeaways. Another low risk beginner activity I like to do is what I call sculpture in the bag. And this one is typically a bit more extensive time wise. The idea is that each student receives the same supplies in a paper bag. I don't use any specific supplies, but I do try to mix it up a bit. I typically supply them with ready-made objects that aren't typically used for art making. When selecting items, I supply them with something that could be used as a platform if they choose. So, that could be cardboard or mat scraps or foam board or even thin plywood if you had it. I try to include multiples. So, paper clips, dowels, push pins. I collect cardboard tubes, so any mailing tubes or paper towel or toilet paper tubes work great. The cardboard rings from tape are really good, and all of those can work. I've cut down lengths of wire from coat hangers, some twine or string. So just, anything laying around the studio that I could create sets of. You could go to the dollar store and get things like beads and clothespins, but I really do try to use what I have laying around. Before we start, we've done a review of the elements and principles, and we've already done some foundational information about sculpture so they know what in the round is. They probably have an idea of the difference between non objective and abstract and representational. So, a little bit of foundational information. I typically have them work independently, but this could work fine for a collaborative activity, again, based on your time and budget circumstances. I will have them create a series of sketches for this one with thoughts about which materials they will use and, plans for attachments, general ideas about how they are creating visual interest. I ask them to work in the round, but they determine whether the work is non-objective, abstract, or representational. It's almost always non-objective. And then once they've done some planning, I cut them loose. I will give them white glue, rubber cement, hot glue, staples, needle and thread, hole punches, X-Actos, whatever I think they might need. I do ask them to consider whether they will alter the materials because I feel like they need that prompt to be allowed to cut into these cardboard tubes or even, on the base paper or, bending the wire. So they really can do whatever they want with the materials. I ask them, you know, when the work is done to photographically document prior to painting. So I feel like asking them to photograph the work prior to painting gives me more information about their craftsmanship and about the form. And then after that, they painted a solid color, typically black or white, a la Louise Nevelson. And this really goes a long way in unifying the work. And so then I have them photograph the finished work and I have them print images of both and they include both of them in their reflection because that finished work tells me a lot more about, I guess, the overall visual interest of the work. It's also a great opportunity to talk to students about how to photograph work for quality for future portfolio work and in regard to thinking about how light and form, the interaction between those things, affect viewer perception, using a clean background so that you're not creating too much visual noise that competes with the form, and also how to zoom in and crop an image through the camera lens. I mean, as well as digitally, but a lot of that can be done through the camera lens as well. And the finished projects, then typically we would then, in addition to a reflection, which I always do, we would critique as a group. So thank you for joining. And I hope that the information on the Marshmallow Challenge and the Sculpture in a Bag is helpful for you in your classroom. Thank you for joining. Next time, I will continue our discussion about sparking creativity in the 3D classroom. Thank you.